She was laughing at him, he thought, in her drowsy, large-eyed way. He was sure of that. He fumbled about nervously with book, baskets and papers and said, "Good Lord, no! Charlie, that's me." She reached out a brown, long-fingered hand and took a strawberry from a basket. She bit into it, and then stood staring at the white-crimson, juicy inner flesh. "Don't you like strawberries?" she said. "Ask the Larkins," he said. "Ask Mariette. They all call me Charlie." "Oh, she knows you, does she?" She put the rest of the strawberry in her mouth and pulled out the clean white plug.
The Jumblies. They went to sea in a sieve, they did. In a sieve they went to sea, in spite of all their friends could say, on a winter's morn, on a stormy day. In a sieve they went to sea. And when the sieve turned round and round, and everyone cried, "You'll all be drowned!" they called aloud, "Our sieve ain't big, but we don't care a button, we don't care a fig. In a sieve we'll go to sea." Far and few are the lands where the Jumblies live. Their heads are green and their hands are blue, and they went to sea in a sieve.
I was born in the year 1632 in the city of York, of a good family, though not of that country, my father being a foreigner of Bremen, who settled first at Hull. He got a good estate by merchandise, and, leaving off his trade, lived afterwards at York, from whence he had married my mother, whose relations were named Robinson, a very good family in that country, and from whom I was called Robinson Kreuznach. But by the usual corruption of words in England, we are now called, nay, we call ourselves, and write our name, Crusoe.
My face must have shown him I believed him utterly. Yet my hands, but it was for pure tenderness, shook him as if to ask him why, if it was all for nothing, he had condemned me to months of torment. "What then did you do?" He looked in vague pain all round the top of the room and drew his breath 2 or 3 times over, as if with difficulty. He might have been standing at the bottom of the sea and raising his eyes to some faint green twilight. "Well, I said things." "Only that?" "They thought it was enough."
It seems to me that no man can be better qualified to sit in Parliament than an editor of a newspaper, that is, if he is capable as an editor. No one, I think, has ever doubted that of you. The only question is whether he be strong enough for the double work. I have doubted about myself, and have therefore given up the paper. I almost regret it." "I dare say you do," said Lady Carbury, feeling intensely anxious to talk about her own affairs instead of his. "I suppose you still retain an interest in the paper?" "Some pecuniary interest, nothing more." "Oh, Mr. Alf, you could do me such a favour." "Can I? If I can, you may be sure I will." False-hearted, false-tongued man. Of course he knew at the moment what was the favour Lady Carbury intended to ask, and of course he had made up his mind that he would not do as he was asked.
"Yes, in 80 days," exclaimed Stuart, who in his excitement made a false deal. "But that doesn't take into account bad weather, contrary winds, shipwrecks, railway accidents, and so on." "All included," returned Phileas Fogg, continuing to play despite the discussion. "But suppose the Hindus or Indians pull up the rails," replied Stuart. "Suppose they stop the trains, pillage the luggage vans, and scalp the passengers." "All included," calmly retorted Fogg, adding as he threw down the cards, "2 trumps." Senor Zorro crept to the corner of the building and found there was no guard. He had guessed and hoped that the Commandante had sent every available man to the chase, but he knew that he would have to act quickly, for some of the troopers might return.
He slipped through the door and crossed the big lounging room, and so came to the door of the office. His pistol was in his hand, and could a man have seen behind the mask, he would have observed that Senor Zorro's lips were crushed in a thin, straight line of determination. As upon that other night, Captain Ramon whirled around in his chair when he heard the door open behind him, and once more he saw the eyes of Senor Zorro glittering through his mask, saw the muzzle of the pistol menacing him.
The Scout's Oath. Before he becomes a scout, a boy must take the Scout's Oath thus. On my honour, I promise that 1. I will do my duty to God and the King. 2. I will do my best to help others, whatever it costs me. 3. I know the Scout law and will obey it. While taking this oath, the Scout will stand, holding his right hand raised level with his shoulder, palm to the front, thumb resting on the nail of the little finger, and the other 3 fingers upright, pointing upwards. This is the Scout salute and secret sign.
When he had seen them all, and, so far as time allowed, inspected them, Croesus addressed this question to him. Stranger of Athens, we have heard much of your wisdom, and of your travels through many lands, from love of knowledge and a wish to see the world. I am curious, therefore, to ask you, whom, of all the men that you have seen, you deem the most happy? This he asked because he thought himself the happiest of mortals. But Solon answered him without flattery, according to his true sentiments. Tell us of Athens, sire. Full of astonishment at what he heard, Croesus demanded sharply, And why do you deem Tellus happiest?
As many more individuals of each species are born than can possibly survive, and as, consequently, there is a frequently recurring struggle for existence, it follows that any being, if it vary however slightly in any manner profitable to itself under the complex and sometimes varying conditions of life, will have a better chance of surviving, and thus be naturally selected. From this strong principle of inheritance, any selected variety will tend to propagate its new and modified form. This fundamental subject of natural selection will be treated at some length in the 4th chapter, and we shall then see how natural selection almost inevitably causes much extinction of the less improved forms of life.
In the course of the next day, the first of the usual betrothal visits were exchanged. The New York ritual was precise and inflexible in such matters, and in conformity with it, Newland Archer first went with his mother and sister to call on Mrs. Welland, after which he and Mrs. Welland and May drove out to old Mrs. Manson Mingott's to receive that venerable ancestress's blessing. A visit to Mrs. Manson Mingott was always an amusing episode to the young man. The house in itself was already an historic document, though not, of course, as venerable as certain other old family houses in University Place and Lower Fifth Avenue.
"Stanton," said Mrs. Maudsley, "we have a note here for Miss Robson, rather urgent. Would you mind taking it?" "Yes'm," said Stanton, holding out his hand. I dug my fingers into my pockets, trying not to let the paper crackle and wriggling helplessly. "I haven't got it," I exclaimed. "I am very sorry, but it must have fallen out of my pocket." "Feel again," said Mrs. Maudsley. "Feel again." I did, without avail. "Oh, very well, Stanton," Mrs. Maudsley said. "Just tell Miss Robson that Miss Marian will be going there sometime this afternoon."